Yeah, without further ado, let's have Marco from Thinks Canary. He did a fantastic little talk yesterday, and I think we're going to have another fantastic little talk today. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Gina. All right, folks, thanks and good morning. I am still Mark, and hopefully I am still the CTO at Thinks Canary. I haven't, no, not yet. I'm not going to go through the same thing that I did yesterday. It will be a slightly different talk. Some of you may have seen us outside yesterday. We are doing demos of our honeypot device. We help you detect attackers in your network. That's kind of our bag. Yesterday, I spoke to you about paying the damn maintainers. And today I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to actually share just some of the engineering practices that we have. And I asked you a question yesterday. I showed you a face. I'm going to show you another face today. It's a fun game. Anyone know who that is? He's a security guy. So probably not going to get a lot of answers here, but that's Dan Gear. Dan is a smart guy. Dan, in 2003, got fired from what was then the premier cybersecurity company, the first real major commercial security company, a company called At Stake. And he got fired because he wrote this report. And this report basically lambasted the software monoculture that existed at the time. Microsoft was the dominant vendor. But I like Dan. He's a security philosopher, if you like. And in one of his speeches, more recent speeches, he's pointed out that there's this US government classification of cybersecurity as an occupation, not a profession. And specifically what they say is that cybersecurity, the rate of change in knowledge in cybersecurity is too fast to be classified as a profession. Now, if you consider things that we do consider, or if you think about professions that are sort of come to mind, things like lawyers or the legal profession or maybe accounting, you can take a lawyer from one firm and move them to another, and they can write contracts at the new firm without too much change. The basics of macroeconomics don't really change. The basics of double entry bookkeeping don't change. And that's not the case in cybersecurity. And it seems to me that there's a lot of overlap, rather, in software development. Right? This is not just a classification, in my view, for cybersecurity. Decades ago, and I've got the VB6 book up here because I have that on a bookshelf somewhere. If you studied software engineering and have not updated your sort of knowledge base since then, you wouldn't be able to enter any modern dev shop. I don't think that's really something that's debatable. You've missed out on a whole host of paradigm shifts, even peer-to-peer architectures, which is at this point several almost decades old. Serverless computing, containers, distributed computing, and there's just many more paradigms that you've missed out on. And that's to say nothing about the individual frameworks, tools, libraries, platforms that have come and gone. There's a whole generation of Flash developers that were deprecated and put out of work when Adobe killed off Flash. And so I think there's a strong argument to say that we're too early into software development to be calling it a profession. Dan specifically uses this term occupation, and I quite like it. And he happens to use the word practitioners for people who occupy that cybersecurity work in the cybersecurity world. And I like that mindset because practitioners learn by seeing what other people around them do. And honestly, that maps much closer to our experience in bringing in new software developers into our organization. We don't give fresh graduates the job of designing complex systems. All right, experience matters. Intuitively, it takes experience to get things right, or at least less wrong, I think, oftentimes. And engineers gain practice by doing and seeing. So to be sure, I think it's also how the experienced folks in an organization learn. Like, part of this event, the value in events like this is looking at other organizations, and these talks give you a peek into how other organizations approach their development, what they do, what their practices are. And that's how we learn. So we've got a bunch of engineering practices. I don't have time to go through all of these. I'm going to go through three of them in particular. I do strongly encourage you to consider your own engineering practices and teach them internally. We've got these three that I want to talk about. Coaching and bounce sessions is one that we do. We're a remote team, and while undoubtedly there are many advantages to having an in-person team, we've got our reasons for going remote, but it means we have to force connections between people, and we do that through this idea of coaching and bounce sessions. So we sort of split our team up into folks who are more experienced and less experienced. The less experienced folks, basically they alternate every second week, they do a 30-minute session with me, and in the off week, they do it with a peer. And then amongst the more senior folks, they do it amongst themselves. And I'm not joking when I say it, I see these sessions as tech therapy, right? You come into these sessions and there is no expectation. There's no deliverables. It is not a check-in. It is not a review. We talk about the work that they're doing at that particular time, and we basically use it as a process to help them improve their process around engineering. We lifted pretty wholesale from a book by Michael Lopp, Brands in Repose. He's got this book, which I really recommend, but he has this idea of a blue tape list. And essentially the idea of the blue tape list is anybody who joins your organization has got a very valuable resource that nobody else has. They have fresh eyes. And those fresh eyes are the thing you can use to highlight all the weird, janky stuff that everybody at this point is just used to and papers over. And so anyone who joins us for the first 3 months, to them, you've got to maintain a list of all the weird questions, the weird things that we do, the things that don't make sense. Maybe the answer will become clear to you in the first 3 months, but if it doesn't, at your third check-in, we go over that list. And then basically we'll either get to answer all those questions and they realize, hopefully we're not a bunch of Muppets, but for the questions that we can't answer, well, we've uncovered something new, something that we actually need to address at Thinkst. And then the last one I want to talk about is we have 3 Taos. Taos here being the, I think, Chinese word for the way. But essentially, these are the principles on which we sort of build our product. And we've documented them in these sort of, it's written down. And so it lets people who come into our organization actually understand the decision-making behind the product so that they don't necessarily have to push up, to somebody else to get an answer. And like it's, we've got a whole hierarchy in our wiki on these tiles, but just to give you a taste of what some of them might be, when we talk about canaries, we build fake services on networks. One of our principles is we don't implement protocols past an authentication gate. I'm not going to go into precisely what that means here, but like it's a principle for how we design canary services. And so anybody who joins us and starts building a new service knows actually I just need to implement it up to the authentication gate. And so giving folks these towers, these principles, lets them understand how we're making decisions behind the product, and then they get to make those decisions as well. So those are the 3 practices that I wanted to kind of touch on. If I just quickly summarize this 10 minutes, I really think we've got an occupation, not a profession. Obviously, this chat could be expanded into probably a 40-minute talk, and there'd be time for a lot more questions. But I am going to be outside if you want to argue with me on this. I do think we learn by seeing and doing when it comes to software development. I mean, I'd actively encourage you to find those practices that work for your own team. That's it. We'll be outside. We're doing demos. I hope you enjoy the rest of PyCon. Thanks.